Tonight on Primetime, Russia's domestic fuel market has been placed under pressure, triggering a domino effect that is beginning to affect countries of its region after a fresh wave of Ukrainian strikes on Russia's oil infrastructure. Could this be the moment Ukraine gets the upper hand? Welcome to the program. I'm Andy Mioch. Ukraine has targeted Russia's oil infrastructure in fresh strikes as refinery disruptions add pressure to the country's fuel market. Ukrainian drones struck an oil refinery in southern Russia overnight, reportedly causing a fire at the facility. The refinery processes some 138,000 barrels of oil per day and has been targeted several times during the war. The strike comes as several Russian regions face fuel shortages, rising prices, and long queues at petrol stations. Moscow has temporarily banned diesel exports to redirect more supplies to the domestic market. Meanwhile, Russia's fuel shortages are beginning to spill over beyond its borders. Several Central Asian states that rely heavily on Russian fuel imports are already reporting supply disruptions and rising prices. Fariza Kalimurzina has the story.
Russia's fuel shortages are beginning to spill beyond its borders, with the first signs of disruption now emerging across Central Asia. The crisis follows Ukrainian strikes that, according to Reuters, damaged more than a quarter of Russia's oil refining capacity. In response, Moscow imposed a ban on gasoline exports and is considering similar restrictions on diesel. While those measures officially exempt members of the Eurasian Economic Union, reduced refining capacity is making it increasingly difficult for Russia to supply foreign markets. According to industry estimates, the country is now facing a fuel shortfall of at least 20,000 tons a day, raising the prospect that it may need to import fuel for the first time in decades. The impact is already visible in Kyrgyzstan, which relies on Russia for more than 90% of its gasoline imports. Some filling stations have reported shortages of premium fuel, prompting the government to seek additional supplies from Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Belarus, Uzbekistan, and Turkmenistan. Uzbekistan has so far avoided physical shortages, but not higher prices after fuel volumes on the country's commodity exchange fell sharply. Wholesale gasoline prices climbed to record levels, raising concerns that transport and food costs could also increase. In Tajikistan, where around 84% of fuel imports come from Russia, diesel shortages have already been reported. Some filling stations suspended sales, while others introduced purchase limits at the height of the agricultural season. Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan remain less exposed because of their own refining capacity. However, their ability to offset lower Russian supplies is limited. In Kazakhstan, authorities are also stepping up efforts to curb fuel smuggling across the border in order to protect domestic supplies. Analysts say the current disruption is exposing the risks of relying on a single fuel supplier. Even if Russia's fuel shortages prove temporary, they believe the crisis could accelerate efforts across Central Asia to diversify fuel imports, with China seen as one of the region's most likely long-term alternatives. Fariza Kalimurzina, Almaty, E! News.
Well, to talk on how Ukraine's strategy has brought Russia problems at the pump and how can Central Asian countries alleviate knock-on effects on their supply chains, we're now joined by David Kirichenko, journalist focusing on war and technology, who's joining us from Seattle. David, welcome. Thank you for joining us on Primetime. Let's start with the military aspect. How successful would you say that Ukraine's strategy of long-range strikes has been in recent weeks, and can Kyiv sustain this tactic?
Well, first, I'd point out that both Russia and many in the West thought this war would be over in a matter of weeks. Russian soldiers packed their bags with victory uniforms, expecting to be marching through Kyiv and to be greeted as heroes. And now we're well into the fifth year of Russia's full-scale invasion, and it's no longer a Russian special military operation, but it's now I call it a special defensive operation across Russia as Ukraine continues scaling its long-range strike package, which includes not only drones but missiles, and they're building them at cheaper and cheaper costs. And the challenge for Russia, and namely its air defense network, has suffered heavy attrition. So there's a very clear strategy from Ukraine on the battlefield with mid-range strikes, attriting some of the shorter range, and they've been working on some of the longer range air defense systems. And then the Russians have found it much easier to bully its neighbors with drones, namely Ukraine, than it is to defend your own territory against drones. And Russia's the biggest country in the world, so that no matter how much air defense systems they have, it's nearly impossible to protect yourself and from the amount of drones that are coming into Russia. And Ukraine every day continues scaling its production of drones, improving the payload, the targeting, using battlefield awareness and data to improve its strikes. So one day Russia may have air defense systems in one area, and then a target is struck where there's air defense systems that are not. And then it's a cat and mouse game. So Russia will continue to struggle to defend itself, and Ukraine, from a technological standpoint, is only going to become stronger and stronger, and Russia's vulnerabilities will grow.
Well, waging war costs money, and we've seen billions of dollars of support for Ukraine pledged at the NATO summit in Ankara. We've also seen the news of a political agreement with the US that would allow licenses to manufacture Patriot interceptors domestically. What can that signal for the future of this conflict?
Well, the Russians have believed throughout the war, and I think Putin still does, that it's a war of attrition now, and all that Russia needs to do is get the West to stop believing in Ukraine's ability to prevail, and then just give up. And that would allow Russia to finally prevail on the battlefield. As it stands, the Russians are not only losing ground, but struggling to advance forward in Ukraine. Yes, there are difficult parts of the front line where Ukraine is defending and at significant costs, such as Konstantinovka, but otherwise, pretty much throughout the front line, it's relatively stable. The Russians are really struggling to advance, and if the Europeans and the Americans continue providing aid, there's not much that the Russians will achieve, even if the war continues going, and it's going to push Russia to make very costly political decisions. Now that Ukraine has brought the war to Russia, and Russians across the entire country are feeling the impact of war, and Putin would likely need to make a call to mobilize Russians, whether it's in the fall or early next year, to keep the war going. And the more that the Europeans step up and take security into their own hands, which includes stepping up support for Ukraine, the more that the Russians will see that continuing this war is futile, and they will need to soon come to the negotiating table. So that greater support paired with Ukraine's growing technological strength will, I think, bring the war closer to an end.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, David, you believe that the Kremlin will seek to escalate things following these latest developments. Would you say that was brought about by these fuel shortages and everything that goes along with that?
Certainly. Well, I think throughout the war, Russia never stopped escalating, and escalation is a sign of weakness from the Russians. I'm reminded of in 2022 all the threats about if Ukraine were to strike the Kerch Bridge connecting mainland Russia to occupied Crimea, that they would unleash Armageddon and talk of nuclear weapons. Yet in the end, each time that Ukraine either bombed the bridge or a target that Russia said was off limits, there's just been silence from the Russians, and they love using the escalation threats and the psychological fear factor against the West. But in reality, now Moscow is being bombed pretty much on a weekly basis, sometimes daily. And when the St. Petersburg and Moscow are being bombed at such a high frequency, and the elites have to deal with themselves, I think it's just putting greater pressure on the Kremlin to show something. If you've suffered well over 1 million casualties, you still haven't taken a regional capital after Ukraine returned Kherson. The Russians are increasingly asking, what do we have to show for this very costly and bloody war that's destroyed our economy? We're mortgaging our future and making ourselves very dependent on China and severed ties with the West. So in effect, Russia as a state is going backwards as it tries to drag the world back into the past. The future looks increasingly bleak for Russia. And from there, all the cards that Russia has is continue to try to escalate, to threaten, to try to secure some sort of victory or gains that it can package and sell to the Russian public, because otherwise this war is a complete failure for Russia.
And these fuel shortages and export restrictions that came with them, this is being felt also in Central Asia. How can this impact Central Asian countries if Russia isn't able to, in some sort of way soon, plug its own shortfall?
Well, the idea that for I think Putin and the Russian elite is that they see Ukraine as the centerpiece for the Russian imperialism. And so they invaded Ukraine to bring it back into the Russian orbit. And as part of that imperial identity, Central Asia is also important because the Russian Empire previously ruled the region. So it's also really important to the Kremlin. And in that, China has been stepping up its efforts to increase influence and ties to the region. So Russia becoming more dependent on China while also being very vulnerable from even being an oil and gas exporter to now needing to halt some of those exports and bring some of that gas in themselves, is showing that Russia as a partner is very weak and vulnerable. And Central Asian states, especially Kyrgyzstan, given that its majority of its oil and gas needs are sourced directly from Russia, I think is going to cause these countries to want to look elsewhere and diversify its network in ties. And one of the countries that will continue growing its influence will be China, and I think that's a loss for the Russians. So while they're losing Ukraine and Eastern Europe, they're also indirectly from these Ukrainian drone strikes hitting Russia's oil refineries, influencing the Central Asian countries to also want to look away from Russia and further eroding Russia's gray identity as an empire and state, while it loses influence in all of its former areas where it had strong influence.
David, thank you so much for joining us on Primetime and sharing your insight and analysis.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, coming up, we take a closer look at fresh reactions in Azerbaijan following the Israeli government's decision concerning the events of 1915. And what could that mean for the region? Don't go away.
As America sleeps, Europe is waking, and the East has begun its day. A News is right here at the center, bringing you the latest stories as they break. I'm Nadia Jani, here with you each weekday morning to share latest world news and the stories shaping our region. Across all platforms and wherever you get your news, we explore the context behind the big headlines. Live from Baku, I bring you a diverse mix of regional and international news, sport and politics for you, an audience that wants a bit more. So join me Monday to Friday for the latest headlines, expert analysis and live updates from around the world. Around the globe and live from Baku, this is Daybreak here on A News.
Welcome back. You are watching Primetime. Israeli government's decision regarding the events of 1915 is drawing strong reactions from Azerbaijan, one of Israel's closest partners in the Eurasian region. The move comes at a sensitive time for regional alliances, with Baku, Ankara and Tel Aviv all weighing its political impact.
Azerbaijan's chief Sephardic Rabbi Zamir Isayev has criticized Israel's recent recognition of the events of 1915 as so-called genocide, warning that the move risks straining relations with Baku while doing little to pressure Turkey. Rabbi Zamir Isayev said Azerbaijan was surprised by the decision, arguing that it turns a sensitive historical issue into a political tool at a time when Israel's relations with Turkey are already under severe strain.
This proposal caused deep disappointment in Azerbaijani society, especially among the Jewish people of Azerbaijan, as well as among many people in Israel society. The decision was sudden and unexpected. As far as we know and understand, there were also no talks with the Azerbaijani side before a decision was made on such a sensitive issue. I personally sent letters to the religious parties in the Knesset, and just yesterday I've received written replies from two of them. I was told that our concerns had been taken seriously, pass it on the right officials and discuss it at the high level.
Israel's cabinet backed the recognition last month, with Foreign Minister Gideon Saar saying the country had a moral and historical duty to acknowledge the event as a genocide. Azerbaijan has rejected the move, calling it a distortion of historical facts and urging Israel to reconsider. Isayev said the recognition would not meaningfully affect Turkey, but could potentially harm Israel's relationship with Azerbaijan, a key regional partner with close energy, security and military ties to the Jewish state.
Azerbaijan has always shown friendship toward Israel, despite its difficult location. At the same time, the Jewish community in Azerbaijan always enjoyed safety, freedom of religion, respect, and strong support, both the state and the society. As the Jewish community of Azerbaijan, we stand together, of course, with the state and the people of Azerbaijan on this matter. We are an important part of the Azerbaijani society, and could not stay silent about the proposals that affected the interest and the concerns of both countries.
The rabbi said he does not expect bilateral ties to suffer further unless the issue is advanced in Israel's parliament, the Knesset. He has also urged members of Israel's governing coalition to block any further declarations or legislation on the matter.
All right, after a short break, we'll check in with our correspondents around the globe. Don't go away.
On World Business, we meet the boardroom leaders making market-moving decisions. And find out how leaders are dealing with continuous technological disruption.
More than 20,000 partisan fighters have been hidden. We found only 3,000.
My grandmother had 3 brothers. In the graveyard, the body of just one of them.
Their struggle was very unequal and against a state that had defeated such a force as Nazi Germany.
A lot of resistant fighters in the beginning of Soviet occupation actually would end up here, if not killed somewhere in the woods.
She was arrested at her home. Her 7-year-old daughter ran to her and screamed, "Mom, please take me with you." This record having the names of the individuals who were placed in the list of deportations.
I was born in Kengia, in a labor camp. My mother was a partisan liaison.
The first years were extremely difficult, of course. Poverty, hunger. The temperature sometimes dropped to minus 50 degrees.
The train stations, like the one behind me, once said goodbyes to thousands of people carried from across the Baltic states toward Siberia.
Welcome back, you're watching Primetime. Let's now check in with our correspondents, and we begin in the UK, where the race to lead Britain's Labour Party appears all but over, with Andy Burnham expected to secure the top job. He has also admitted the party, quote, got it wrong on Gaza and promised a tougher approach to Israel. Zainab Farajzadeh reports.
Andy Burnham is on the verge of becoming the UK's next Prime Minister after securing overwhelming support in the race to lead the Labour Party. He received the backing of 322 Labour MPs on the first day of nominations, but the magic number is 323 nominations, though he is just one shy of ruling out a leadership contest. However, several MPs who were unable to vote on Thursday say they intend to support him once they return to Parliament. As Burnham moves closer to replacing Keir Starmer, he has also sought to address one of the most sensitive issues facing the party in recent years, its response to the war in Gaza. Speaking during his leadership campaign, he apologized for Labour's initial handling of the conflict, saying the party got it wrong. He acknowledged that the party's position caused pain to many people, and his comments refer to Labour's stance at the beginning of the war under Starmer, who faced criticism in 2023 after saying Israel had the right to cut off power and water together. Starmer's office later clarified that he was referring to Israel's general right to self-defense under international law. Burnham said Labour learned from those mistakes and pointed to changes in the party's position since then. That includes support for recognizing a Palestinian state and sanctions against some Israeli ministers and settlers. Looking ahead, he said he wants the UK to put greater pressure on Israel to improve the humanitarian situation in Gaza, while continuing to support efforts towards a lasting peace. With no serious challenger expected to emerge, Burnham is now widely expected to become Labour leader and in turn the country's next Prime Minister. Zainab Farajzadeh, A News, Manchester, United Kingdom.
In France, attention is turning to the 2027 presidential race after a major development involving one of the country's leading far-right political figures, Marine Le Pen. Anita Sharma has more.
Welcome to This Day in Europe, where Marine Le Pen is back in France's presidential race and back on top of the polls. Just days after an appeals court upheld her conviction for embezzling European Parliament funds, but dramatically shortening her ban from holding office, new surveys show the National Rally leader leading the field for France's 2027 presidential election. The three polls put Le Pen at around 36% in the first round, with projections showing she would narrowly defeat either former Prime Minister Edouard Philippe or centrist Gabriel Attal in a runoff. Hard left leader Jean-Luc Mélenchon would lose by a wide margin to Le Pen. It's a remarkable turnaround for a politician whose presidential ambitions appeared to be in serious doubt just days ago. The election would be Le Pen's fourth bid for the French presidency after unsuccessful campaigns in 2012, 2017, and 2022. This time, however, President Emmanuel Macron cannot run again because of term limits, leaving France's political center without an incumbent standard-bearer. Le Pen has cast her legal battle as proof she's taking on what she calls the political establishment, telling supporters, "These trials, I believe, have strengthened us." Now, although free pending her final appeal, Le Pen could still end up serving a year under electronic monitoring wearing an ankle tag. However, her path to the Élysée will also depend on her long-standing partnership with party president Jordan Bardella. During the months when Le Pen faced the prospect of being barred from the race, he emerged as the party's potential presidential candidate. Now, the pair are campaigning together again, combining Le Pen's experience with Bardella's popularity among younger voters as the party seeks to broaden its appeal. Her hardline message remains very central. In a post on X, Le Pen stated that in 1 year, we will regain control over immigration and criminal policy. France's highest court is still expected to rule on Le Pen's final appeal before voters go to the polls, so a lot can happen before April. After surviving the biggest legal challenge of her career, Le Pen will now try to achieve what has eluded her 3 times before: winning the French presidency. For A News, I'm Anita Sharma in Arnhem, Netherlands.
Iran's slain supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has been laid to rest in his hometown of Mashhad, marking the end of a week of mourning and massive funeral processions in cities across Iran and neighboring Iraq. Turaj Shiralilu reports from Mashhad.
The late supreme leader of Iran and 3 of his family members have finally been laid to rest. The burial took place early Friday after week-long state and public funeral processions in the capital Tehran, the city of Qom, and the Iraqi cities of Najaf and Karbala, home to the shrines of Shiite saints. The ceremony had been delayed for more than 4 months because of the Israeli-US war with Iran. Aside from serving as a political figurehead, Iran's late supreme leader was a grand Ayatollah, a top religious status in Shia Islam for someone who reached the highest level of scholarship in Islamic law. Following the Islamic Revolution in 1979, Ayatollah Khamenei led Iran for about 4 decades, shaping its domestic and foreign policies longer than any other political figure of his generation. His massive funeral rituals were seen as a tribute to his legacy, as well as a demonstration of post-war political resilience. Following his death, the leadership was passed to his son, Ayatollah Sayyid Mojtaba Khamenei. Because of the extensive funeral processions, Tehran and Washington postponed their technical level talks on implementing the ceasefire agreement that was signed last month. Now, the future of those talks remains in doubt following an exchange of attacks between the 2 sides in recent days. Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has held phone calls with his counterparts from Oman, Pakistan, and Qatar, as well as foreign ministers of Turkey and Saudi Arabia. He also talked on phone with Pakistan's army chief, who led the negotiations that led to an initial ceasefire, focusing on de-escalating the latest tensions and resuming talks between the US and Iran. Turaj Shiralilu from Mashhad for A News.
Meanwhile, Pakistan and Qatar are trying to keep diplomacy alive after renewed fighting between the United States and Iran threatened a fragile peace process. Islamabad says dialogue remains the only way forward. Mariam Zia reports from the Pakistani capital.
Pakistan is stepping up diplomatic efforts to keep the United States and Iran at the negotiating table. On Wednesday, Pakistan's Foreign Ministry expressed deep concern over the renewed violence this week. It urged all parties to exercise restraint. The minister said there is no alternative to continued engagement, dialogue, and diplomacy. It also called on both sides to honor their commitments under the Islamabad Memorandum of Understanding. Pakistan says it remains ready to support efforts to reduce tensions. By Thursday, Pakistan and Qatar were continuing diplomatic contacts with both Washington and Tehran. The aim is to prevent ceasefire framework from collapsing and bring both sides back to negotiations. Talks remains focused on unresolved issues including maritime security, sanctions relief, and implementation of the deal. The latest escalation has increased pressure on the mediation effort, but neither side has formally withdrawn from the agreement. That leaves space for diplomacy, even as Pakistan and Qatar work to keep the peace process alive. Mariam Zia, A News, Islamabad.
Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan says he expects tangible progress in his country's defense ties with the United States after his meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump at this week's NATO summit. The comments come amid growing optimism that long-standing disputes over sanctions and fighter aircraft could soon be resolved. Adam Morrow has the details in Istanbul.
Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan says he expects his meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump to deliver concrete results for Turkey's defense industry, especially on Ankara's domestically developed Khan fighter aircraft and its ongoing bid to rejoin the U.S.-led F-35 fighter jet program. Speaking Thursday, Erdogan described his bilateral meeting with Trump during this week's NATO summit in Ankara as constructive, saying he believed the discussions would lead to a positive outcome. The meeting marked the highest-level engagement between the two leaders since Trump returned to office early last year, with defense cooperation emerging as a key item on the agenda. At the summit, Trump signaled that Washington was prepared to lift sanctions imposed on Turkey's defense sector under the Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act, or CAATSA. The sanctions were imposed in 2020 after Turkey acquired the Russian-made S-400 air defense system, prompting the United States to remove Ankara from the multinational F-35 program and restrict cooperation with Turkey's defense industry. Since then, Ankara has repeatedly argued that the sanctions were unjustified and has sought their removal while also calling for Turkey's readmittance to the F-35 program. Despite these obstacles, Turkey has stepped up development of its domestic defense industry, with the fifth-generation Khan fighter jet becoming one of its flagship projects. Erdogan's latest remarks suggest that both sides may now be seeking to reset relations, especially in the defense industrial field, after several years of tension. While no formal agreements have yet been announced, both Turkish and U.S. officials have signaled a willingness to deepen cooperation, raising hopes that this week's summit in Ankara could mark a new chapter in defense ties between the two NATO allies. This is Adam Morrow for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
Azerbaijan and Georgia are moving ahead with a series of long-term energy agreements covering electricity, gas, and transit. The latest step has now come from Baku. Nini Nikolaishvili has more on that in Tbilisi.
President Ilham Aliyev has approved the agreement on electricity supply to Georgia and electricity transit through Georgian territory. It was originally signed on May 18th in Baku during talks between Aliyev and Georgian Prime Minister Irakli Kobakhidze and is designed to remain in force for 20 years. Under the decree, Azerbaijan's energy minister will now handle implementation, while the foreign minister will notify Tbilisi once the domestic procedures required for the agreement to enter into force have been completed. The agreement was not signed in isolation. On the same day in Baku, the two countries also extended a 2-decade-old gas supply agreement by another 20 years and signed new terms covering the Georgian section of the Baku-Supsa oil pipeline. They also agreed to restart daily passenger rail service between Tbilisi and Baku, which resumed on May 26 after a 6-year suspension. The numbers show why this matters. Azerbaijan is now Georgia's top electricity supplier. Georgia imported around $25 million worth of electricity from Azerbaijan last year, more than double the previous year's figure, out of roughly $48 million in total electricity imports. On the gas side, Azerbaijan supplies close to 85% of Georgia's natural gas, worth more than $236 million in 2025 alone. Georgian officials estimate the country depends on its neighbors for around 40% of its electricity needs on average, with that figure rising above 60% in some months, since much of Georgia's own hydropower output is seasonal. For Baku, the arrangement also secures a transit route. Azerbaijani electricity crosses Georgian territory on its way to Turkey as part of a wider energy corridor linking the Caspian region to European markets, alongside pipeline projects such as the South Caucasus pipeline and Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan pipeline. With this decree now signed, the agreement moves a step closer to entering into force, formalizing an energy relationship that both governments describe as central to regional security and connectivity. Nini Nikolaishvili, Tbilisi, A News.
Beijing has issued an orange rainstorm alert as moisture from Super Typhoon Bavi, potentially the most powerful storm to hit China in years, moves northward. The warning comes as parts of the country are still cleaning up from deadly flooding that has already claimed dozens of lives this week. Mahnur Makhdoom has more on that in Beijing.
The Beijing Meteorological Observatory has issued an orange rainstorm alert, warning of heavy to torrential rainfall across the capital from Friday through the weekend. Authorities issued the highest level heavy rain alerts for 6 of Beijing's 16 districts. Up to 150 millimeters of rain within 6 hours in some areas is forecast. Districts including Miyun and Fangshan have shut down schools and cancelled outdoor activities, asking the public to stay indoors. Residents have been advised to avoid unnecessary travel, stay away from rivers and steep slopes, and monitor official weather updates. Bavi is forecast to make landfall on Saturday evening in Fujian province. Forecasters have warned that whichever track the storm takes after the landfall, authorities need to be especially vigilant against secondary disasters such as flash floods, mudslides, and transport disruptions. The warning comes as the death toll from devastating floods in southern China's Guangxi region rose to 39, with 9 people still missing. With Bavi now bearing down on the east coast, authorities are bracing for further severe weather across multiple regions simultaneously. China's weather warning system runs on 4 levels: blue, yellow, orange, and red. Orange indicates a serious risk requiring immediate precautionary action. Mahnur Makhdoom, A News, Beijing.
Turning to Africa, the Ugandan judiciary has rejected calls to end the use of titles like My Lord and Your Worship in the country's courts. The Uganda Law Society, which is the regulatory body for advocates in Uganda, instructed its lawyers to stop using the colonial titles in court, reviving debate over efforts to decolonize the legal system. Isabel Nakiria reports.
The Uganda Law Society urges that titles such as My Lord and Your Worship are relics of British colonial rule and no longer reflects a modern justice system. The lawyers' body has instructed advocates to stop using the titles in court and also discourage the practice of bowing before judges, saying It places the judiciary above those appearing before it. It says the reforms are intended to promote dignity, equality, and a more independent legal culture. But Uganda's judiciary rejected the directive, insisting that lawyers have no authority to determine courtroom practices or judicial protocol. Uganda inherited many of its legal traditions from Britain, where judges are still addressed using similar titles. The debate reflects a wider conversation across Africa, where several countries are re-examining colonial-era institutions and whether traditions such as courtroom dress, wigs, and formal titles still have a place in modern justice systems. Isabel Nakiria for N-News in Kampala.
All right, after the break, we'll take a look at other top stories making the headlines today. We'll be right back.
Attention is focused on Ankara. NATO leaders have gathered here for a major summit that could shape the future of transatlantic security.
This summit has shown that the alliance is stronger than ever. An alliance that is united and ready to defend every inch of our territory.
The decisions taken during these meetings carry global significance.
We just concluded a very successful NATO summit here in Turkey, and I want to thank President Erdogan, who's really a great man. He's a great leader.
From new defense initiatives to the preparations behind the scenes, Ankara has become the center of international attention.
Muhteşemdi dediler. Hatta bazıları biz Yeniçerilerinizi tanırız dediler.
Our special report takes you behind the scenes of this major event, exploring the preparations, key decisions, and the main highlights of the meetings behind under the theme Key to Peace.
We are in Seoul's Republic of Korea, a country that for more than 70 years has lived in the shadow of unfinished war.
I was 18 years old when the Korean War broke out. My two brothers were dragged out to the front yard of the village public hall and forcibly subjected to a trial under the name of People's Trial.
The military demarcation line, created after the Korean War, became a massive wall, preventing separated families from meeting.
Less than a kilometer away lies North Korea.
지금 우리 무장력은 그 어떤 위기에도 대응할 철저한 준비가 되어 있으며
Подписанный сегодня договор предусматривает в том числе оказание взаимной помощи в случае агрессии против одного из участников.
Russian-Ukraine war now is connected with North Korean participation in Russian army.
The complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula is the only outcome that we will find acceptable.
If the U.S. persists in such hostile policy towards the DPRK, there will never be denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula.
Welcome back. You're watching Primetime. A future peace between the United States and Iran remains in doubt following exchanges of fire in the Gulf. The United Nations has now warned the renewed violence could further destabilize the region. Here's more.
The United Nations is urging for restored calm between the US and Iran following a breakdown in their agreed ceasefire. The US said it struck around 90 military targets Wednesday night, including some near the Strait of Hormuz. Iran said at least 14 people were killed and 78 injured across 5 provinces. State media also reported strikes near the Bushehr nuclear power plant, although the United States has not commented on those claims. In response, Iran launched attacks targeting US military assets in Kuwait, Bahrain and Qatar. Iranian state-linked media later reported further strikes on sites in Kuwait, Jordan and Iraq. Iran's foreign ministry strongly condemned the latest US attacks, calling them a grave war crime, accusing Washington of dangerous actions. It also said bridges and a railway line linking Tehran to Mashhad, where the former supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has been buried, were damaged during the strikes. The United Nations has expressed deep concern over the renewed violence in and around Iran and the Strait of Hormuz, warning that the latest escalation risks further destabilizing an already volatile region.
This tit for tat needs to stop, right? A return to diplomacy is urgently needed for the sake of stability in the region, for the sake of global stability. I mean, we keep talking about the impact that this conflict is having on the global economy, and I think all of the parties involved need to understand that the best way to end this conflict is a return to the negotiating table.
While the ceasefire appears to be broken, Pakistan's lead negotiator is working to bring both sides back to the table.
South Korean chipmaker SK Hynix has made the largest ever listing by a foreign company on the U.S. markets. It's raised $26.5 billion in its initial flotation on New York's NASDAQ. Hynix, which is a key supplier of AI memory chips to the tech giant NVIDIA, priced shares at $149 each ahead of the listing. The firm has pledged to use the proceeds of the sale to invest in its manufacturing capacity as global demand for AI data centers continues to rise. SK Hynix has seen its share price more than triple in South Korea this year, where its overall market value passed the $1 trillion mark in May. Over in China, at least 28 people have been killed in a fire at a shoe factory in the southeast of the country after flames spread through the building, trapping workers on the rooftop. Officials say 213 people were evacuated, 26 were found dead, and 2 others died in the hospital. Investigators say the blaze started on the ground floor, where flammable materials and adhesives were stored. Several company officials have been detained and the factory's bank accounts frozen. The Bayeux Tapestry has returned to UK soil for the first time in more than 900 years for what's been called a once-in-a-lifetime exhibition. The 11th century artwork depicts events leading up to the Norman conquest of Britain. It's believed to have been sewn by nuns in England before being transported to the northern French town of Bayeux, where it has stayed for most of the last millennium. More than 7 million people are expected to go see the artifact at the British Museum in London from September this year to July 2027. French President Emmanuel Macron has said the loan of the artwork was a tangible expression of long-standing friendship between France and the United Kingdom. A renewed wave of xenophobic violence in South Africa has driven thousands of Zimbabweans back across the border. While many have reached safety, attention is shifting to how returnees will rebuild their lives in an economy already under significant strain.
More than 77,000 Zimbabweans have returned from South Africa since the latest outbreak of xenophobic violence. Over 21,000 were repatriated by the government, while the majority made their own way home through the Beitbridge border post, where pressure to process returnees has been immense. Analysts predict the numbers of those returning will swell in coming days and could immediately reduce the amount of money sent back home and have a long-term impact on the local economy.
People now think there will be a sudden decline. It's too early to make an assessment. in terms of diaspora remittances. But what will affect also both countries is now the movement of expertise, labor and labor requirements that are needed, and also the social pressures, particularly in Zimbabwe, the cost of integrating the retainees.
Zimbabwe's ability to absorb thousands of returnees will determine whether their homecoming becomes a fresh start or a temporary stop before many once again seek opportunities across the border.
Most of them have left families, they have left assets in South Africa. So I don't believe that they've got the will to remain in this country. So they are simply waiting for the situation to subside in terms of the antagonism and the anger that's in South Africa. And once the atmosphere is now settled, they will resume their trek back to South Africa. So they have a capacity to go back because they went back there without documents, and they can go back there without documents.
Zimbabwe's government is helping returning children to enroll in school and providing other social support structures to give returning citizens a soft landing.
And one more story before we go. The 4th Shusha Global Media Forum is set to take place next week. The event is meant to bring together media leaders from around the world to discuss the role of journalism in promoting peace and rebuilding trust.
Each year, media leaders, policymakers and experts come together in Shusha, a city in Azerbaijan's Karabakh region, a cultural capital, and now a platform for a global conversation on media, trust and the future. But why? Why does a media forum matter in a world that already has more information than ever? Because the real problem is no longer access, it is trust. That is the forum's purpose, to bring media voices, officials and experts together to examine how journalism responds to a changing world. One of the forum's central moments is a direct exchange with Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev, where participants raise questions on media freedom, regional politics and global affairs. Over 3 hours of questions and answers delivered in 4 languages.
Media representatives, they have a special responsibility.
Beyond the headlines, A News has been embedded in the forum itself, not just covering it, but contributing to its coverage on the ground. But what is waiting for us this year? To find out, we need to trace the pattern. In the first forum, the question was, how does media adapt? In the second, the conversation shifted to, who controls the truth? In the third, it became, can journalism stay credible? Growing year by year, each edition has welcomed more participants from more countries. Now comes the fourth forum. From peacebuilding and reconstruction to media diplomacy, disinformation, AI ethics and cross-border dialogue, this year's agenda points to one question. Can media rebuild trust? That is the fourth layer, the future.
Well, that's our show. Thank you so much for watching and join us again on Monday. From all of us here at A News, have a nice evening and a very nice weekend.